I'm about 2 to 3 miles south of Aalborg, and I just saw this old windmill. Not really sure what the story is behind it, but it looked kind of interesting. I know there's a couple of other windmills in this area that date back to the 1800s, so maybe this windmill is from that date as well. But just looking at it, looks like it's a pretty old structure. It's actually located on a hill or an artificial slope, and there's some sheds and stuff beside it. But yeah, I imagine this mill was used for flour or for some other type of grinding. It looks like it's in pretty decayed shape, actually. Just looking at the blades there, pretty worn out and look like they're in need of a paint job. There's also quite a bit of moss and decay growing on the side of the windmill. But just the location, we are, as I said, 2 to 3 miles south of the Aalborg center. And this is a bit of high ground located south of Aalborg. I imagine when this windmill was built, it was actually all farmland, but right now there's some apartment complexes. There's actually a car dealership just south of here. And there's a pretty substantial highway located behind those trees. So this area's obviously developed quite a bit since this windmill was established, but looking at it, it's a pretty old construction. This area actually has quite a bit of modern wind turbines, so I guess even back then they were still using the wind for things. And looking at the shed by the windmill, maybe this was where they did the grinding or where some of the machinery of the mill was located. This building's actually kind of pretty short and pretty squat, so not sure how much headroom you'd have in there. I mean, looking at the door, I'm actually taller than the height of that door, so you'd have to duck to get in there. Although, from what I understand, people back in the 1800s were actually a little bit shorter than they are today due to the nutrition they received. So maybe that door height was the average door height for the average person back when this mill was built. But looking around, there's actually the remains of a small wind turbine located in the bushes over there. And behind us, there's just some trees and shrubbery. There's actually some junk over there in the bushes. And there's the highway with the stoplight. And here's the base of the windmill. You can see this concrete, which was part of the original windmill construction. You can see how they artificially raised the ground this windmill is based on. And you can see how much decay and how much moss there is that's grown on the windmill. It's also interesting, as you look up there, you can see some of the gear works that are associated with the windmill. So you see there's a couple of gears over there. It's interesting that they actually have them outside of the windmill as opposed to inside it. But yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it was used as some sort of hoist or some sort of crane or something like that that was powered by the windmill. And I also noticed there's all those chains and looks like possibly an old boom or something like that on the top that's hanging off the windmill. So yeah, maybe that was used, powered by the windmill, to hoist things up and down up to the top of the windmill. Because imagine how these windmills work, at least if they work similar to the water mills I've been inside. They basically take all of the grain or whatever needs to be milled up to the top of the mill and then uses gravity to actually feed it through the millstone, which is probably located somewhere in the base or in the stomach of the mill. And then I imagine that door back there is where they unloaded the milled product from the mill. So in judging by this area, I imagine it was a grain mill or something associated with farm, because all of this area here looks like it was at one point farmland. You can actually see how hilly and expansive the landscape is from here. And you can also see in the background how much this land's been developed recently with all the apartments and houses and stuff. And there's actually a couple of houses located even right next to the mill. But it is good that they actually preserved the mill and didn't just bulldoze it and put some additional housing here. That's actually pretty interesting, that root there from that little bush. It's grown over the concrete. But yeah, you can also see all the cracks and wear in the concrete, which tells how old this is, and you can see the brickwork is in need of a paint job. And down there is another, probably access to the cellar of the mill. So I think I'll go take a look at that as well. And inside the cellar here, there's actually a bulkhead or a door that's used to access the cellar of the mill. And imagine this would have been where they unloaded the cargo from the mill. And the roof's obviously been redone with modern aluminum and modern woodwork. And I'm not sure if that shelf or that gantry would have been part of the mill. It looks like it actually goes into the basement, so that may have been original woodwork, but it also doesn't really look like it's that old. There's some steps up to it. It's actually pretty steep steps. It looks like it's actually even missing a stair there. So between the second and third stair, it looks like there was originally one. But also looking at it, there's actually somebody wrote a little bit of graffiti in the cellar of the mill as well. So I'm not sure what it says. It's probably in Denmark or in Danish, so I won't be able to read it. But yeah, somebody put a little bit of that. Actually looks like it's a dirty word there, but it looks like it has an E instead of the other letter. But the red graffiti is pretty ugly, but that actually looks like somebody put a little effort into it. And up there, there's a window that got blanked out, so that's interesting. I'm not sure why they would blank out the window. And it looks like they're using this to store some cones or some street signals for construction. There's also some old cigarettes and some remnants of probably roof tiles or something of that nature. And here's a look at the blades of the windmill. You can see it's basically just wooden planks that are angled in order to catch the wind. Obviously it's not the most efficient design, and it's nothing compared to modern wind turbines. But I guess back then they didn't understand the aerodynamics required to build a more efficient windmill. You can also see that the blades are pretty well rotted through and a couple sections are missing, so it's in pretty rough shape. There's the fulcrum which the windmill spins around. Just zoom in on it. Yeah, there's the fulcrum. It's one of the few pieces of this windmill that's actually made of metal. I'm sorry for the shaking of the camera there. You can also see at the top of the windmill there's a decorative globe or something of that nature. And back there's the gantry I showed you before. Couple of windows as well. And actually looking at the windows, it's at least, looks like this is at least a three-story building. So there's the two windows in the top of the windmill, and then there's actually 4 stories if you include the basement. So there's the story which the door is looking on, and then there's the basement which the basement windows are located on. I actually wonder what the stairs inside look like. Maybe it's a winding staircase like they have in lighthouses or something. I also noticed that the windmill's oriented so the blades are facing to the east-northeast, so I imagine that's the prevailing direction of the wind in this area. And here you can also get a good idea of the artificial mound that this mill is built on. So they added some dirt to get this windmill a little higher, and the windmill itself is actually located on a hill. You can see there's the street level way down there. And here's one more look at the blades of the windmill. So here you can see in the center of the fulcrum which the windmill spins around, or which the blades spin around. Looks like it at one point was painted red, but it's pretty thoroughly rusted over. And you can also see the metal pins which hold the blades in place. So imagine with the blades spinning like that, there's actually quite a bit of force on the fulcrum and on that framework, so it has to be pretty strong to keep the blades from falling off. And this is a look inside one of the windows at the base of the mill. The windows are actually, some of them are broken and it looks like it's in pretty rough shape, and they actually covered this over with plexiglass. And there's that shed access to the basement of the mill, so that's where the graffiti was. Looks like there's actually a skylight right there, so it would have been able to provide lighting to the cellar of the mill even if they didn't have electricity, which I imagine this mill actually predates electricity, or at the very least was built when electricity was not widespread enough to be wired out here to electrify this mill. There's another look at the city. So those are some larger buildings on the outskirts of the city. And I'm just on the outskirts of the mill property, and you can hear the streets actually right to the back of me. And you notice this field is pretty well overgrown, but I also noticed this concrete structure here, which I imagine was a loading ramp or something of that nature, used to get stuff up the hill to the mill. So it is on a slight embankment over the streets. And then the mill is over there behind the bushes, which I imagine those trees and bushes weren't there when the mill was in operation. I did try and do some research of this mill before I came here, but couldn't find anything on this specific mill. There were a couple of other mills nearby that dated back to the Victorian era, so I imagine this has a similar history. And it's just one of the many grain mills that were established in this part of Denmark. There's a house in the background.